Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome back to yet another episode on Little's Law YouTube channel. So today in this video, we will see about the interviewing skills, which as a performance tester you have to have when taking your interview. So although we know a lot of performance testing content and we have lots of hands-on experience, but still some of us would really struggle to answer the question during the interview. So this session will definitely help you, like it helped almost hundreds of people who have subscribed to Little Star YouTube channel, and they have really happy about the content that I shared with them and the way they learned, and they have sent me a lot of messages over the chat and in the YouTube comments. So today in this video we will see about another interviewing question. So this is in fact a question that has been asked by one of our subscriber, and he wants this question has to be answered, and everyone who is watching our channel should know this before they take the interview. So now we will see this question. So the question goes like this. So the interviewer asked the interviewee, the person who he is interviewing, so he asked him, have you ever been responsible for designing a test plan, and if so, could you provide a detailed explanation of the key components you included in the test plan? Additionally, what specific performance metrics did you consider essential while designing the test plan? So many of us, most of us, like we do work on performance testing on our day-to-day daily activity, but still when it comes to test plan, we really struggle in this question, because at that point of time we might forget what are the key components that we added and what are the metrics that we add as part of the test plan. So this video, I would say, please do watch this video before you take your interview, because I have covered the entire set of answers, and these answers are being discussed with some of my performance test engineers who are at the senior most level. I have discussed these answers and then I'm coming up with these answers. So please do watch this video before you go to the interviews. And before we move on to the answer, this is me, Vasan Shanmugam. I welcome you all to Little Sly YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you have not subscribed yet. Like, share and comment your questions and feedback in the comments section. So now we will go to the answer. So the first thing is the test plan component. So since he had asked, the interviewer had asked, like, what are the components that you add as part of the test plan, that you include in the test plan? So the first thing is the introduction and the objective. So what does this introduction and objective talks about is the test plan begins with an introduction which outlines the purpose, the scope and objectives of the performance testing project, and we have to clarify what the project aims to achieve and the specific areas under evaluation. So that is the very first area that we have to cover, which is the under the introduction and objective. So we have to cover the purpose, scope and objective of the performance testing project. And then coming back to the second part, which is the scope and coverage. So this section defines the scope of the testing effort, which includes the functionalities, the user scenarios and the platforms to be tested, and it helps set clear boundaries for testing activities. And then coming back to the third part, which is the test strategy. So the test strategy outlines the approach, the methodologies to be used in the performance testing, and it includes factors such as workload modeling, the type of tests, which include load test or stress test or endurance test, etc., and any other specific testing tools and environments. So all these type of tests that we do and the tools and environments we use for the testing will be under the test strategy. And coming back to the test environment, so this is the fourth part, which is the test environment. So under the test environment, we have to describe the hardware, the software, the network configuration and any third-party systems which are required for the testing. And we have to, and it ensures that the testing environment closely replicates the production setup. And this is very important, because in most of the scenarios the client will be asking us that what is the environment that you need and why is that has to be a replication of your production. This is again a separate topic, but again, this, when it comes to the test environment, that's the fourth point here. So when it comes to the test environment, we have to describe the hardware, the software, the network configurations, and any third-party systems. So here, let me just highlight. So under test environment, so we have to also ensure that the test environments closely replicates the production setup. And then next comes the test schedule. So under the test schedule, we have to provide a timeline for various testing phases, including the planning, the test execution, the analysis, and reporting, and it helps in coordinating the efforts and managing expectations. And coming back to the next point, which is the test data, the sixth component, which is the test data. So this test data defines the data which are required for testing, which includes the user profiles, the transaction volumes, and any specific data configurations. So accurate test data ensures realistic simulation. So that is why we have to have a proper test data in the testing, and that has to be added during the test planning as one of the component. And then the next part is the workload model. So this workload model describes the distribution of virtual users or transactions across different scenarios, and that scenarios should represent the real world user behavior. Also, it can be taken from the analytics tool as part of your project. And this workload model helps in designing tests that mirror the actual usage patterns, and that is the reason we are doing this workload modeling. So the main objective of designing or adding this workload model as part of the test plan component is to design tests that emulate the actual usage patterns, and it has to represent the real world user behavior. And then the eighth part, which is the test scenarios. So in this test scenario, we have to list the user scenarios to be tested, which includes the common user actions and any potential edge cases, and each scenario represents a specific usage pattern. Next comes the test scripts and scenario execution. So this component provides details about the scripts that used to simulate the user interactions, and we have to explain how the scripts are executed, how are they going to be monitored and controlled during testing. So all those descriptions, which is the simulation of user interaction and how they're executed, how they're monitored and controlled during testing, so these should be covered under the test scripts and scenario execution. And next comes the performance metrics, which is the 10th component. So under this performance metrics, we have to define the performance metrics that will be monitored and measured during testing, and these metrics help evaluate the system's performance and identifying of the bottleneck. So this is a very critical component, because under this component we define the performance metrics that will be monitored and measured during testing, and these metrics that we collect under this component will help to evaluate the system's performance and for identifying the bottlenecks. And next comes the assertion and success criteria, which is the 11th component. So this component outlines the pass or fail criteria for different scenarios based on performance metrics, and this helps to determine when the application is performing as expected. So this is very critical again, because this actually tells the stakeholders, the developers, and tells that what is the pass or fail criteria for different scenarios based on the performance metrics, whether the response time has crossed the SLA, or whether it is under the SLA, or whether it is under the accepted service level agreement, whether the response times are under agreed value. So this helps to determine when the application is performing as expected. And then next comes the 12th component, which is the monitoring and analysis. So here we have the monitoring and analysis. So this Component describes the monitoring tools and techniques which are used during testing to capture real-time performance data, and it includes considerations for server monitoring, for resource utilization and response time. So in case if we are adding any APM tools like Dynatrace or Loadrun or App Dynamics or any other APM tools, or in case if you are just going to use only a testing tool for monitoring, you would need to mention them that what are all the tools that you're going to use and how are they going to be used. And then next comes the risk assessment and mitigation, which is the 13th component. So this component identifies for any potential risks that might impact the testing process or the application's performance, and this outlines mitigation strategies to address these risks. And then the 14th component, which is the reporting, and this specifies the format and content of the performance test reports, which includes performance analysis, identified issues and recommendations for improvements. And next and the last comes the roles and responsibilities. So under this component we have to define the responsibilities of team members who are involved in the testing process, including testers, developers and stakeholders. So we have to identify and we have to mention like what are all the responsibilities and roles of the team members and what are they going to do and what are the activities they are involved in. So these are the test plan components. So let me just go back once again. So it should contains the introduction and objective, the scope and coverage, the test strategy, the test environment, the test schedule, the test data. Next comes the workload model and then the test scenarios, the test scripts and scenario execution, and then the performance metrics, the assertion and success criteria, the monitoring and analysis, and then next comes the risk assessment and mitigation, and then the reporting and the roles and responsibilities. So if you were able to answer these questions as part as your first part of the question, so you have almost cleared your interview. So this is the critical part which must or which is expected by the interviewer. So now let's move on to the next part as part of this question. So the interviewer had asked you another question, that is, what are all the performance metrics that you consider as essential while designing the test plan that is very critical to your performance testing. So when we come here as part of the performance metrics, so here let me bring the pen. So here first one is the response time. So this response time, using this we measure the time taken for the application to respond to user actions, and it helps evaluate the user experience and to identify any performance bottleneck. So we all know response time is the main and the critical performance metric. So we will give the performance metrics as the first performance metric in the result, and then next comes the throughput. So why do we need to add the throughput? Because this throughput represents the number of transactions processed per second, and this assesses the system's capacity to handle the concurrent user request. Because at some point of time when you are increasing your throughput and if the system works fine with that particular throughput, then we can come to a conclusion that the system can handle. So for example, in this scenario, if your machine can handle up to 200 hits per second, so then that is the capacity, and if it throws error when it crosses 200 hits per second, then we can come to a conclusion that the capacity of the system works fine with 200, and when it crosses 200 the system cannot handle the load. So in this way the throughput is very critical when it comes to the performance metric. And next comes the error rate. So this error rate tracks the frequency of errors which are encountered during testing, and high error rates can indicate instability or any issues within the application. So error rate are something which tells us that the application is unstable or there are issues within the application. And next comes the resource utilization. So what is resource utilization? Because when we monitor the usage of CPU, the memory, the disk, and for any network resources during testing, we are monitoring the resources, that how much they are being utilized during the testing. So these resource utilization must be monitored during the testing, and we have to track the, or we have to monitor the usage of these resources. And this resource utilization highlights any resource constraints that may impact the performance. So that's why we should monitor the resource utilization as part of the performance testing. And next comes the concurrency and scalability. So during this, or I would say as part of this metric, the concurrency and scalability evaluates how well the system can handle increasing user loads without degrading the performance. So in some scenarios, we'll be testing the load, the application with 200 user load, but in the next scenario, the client might ask you that what if I want to scale the load of this test to 300 or to 400. So when we are doing, or when we are increasing the user load without degrading the performance, so that is where the scalability comes into picture. And next comes the page load time. So page load time is another critical metric because it measures the time it takes for a web page to load completely, and this affects the user experience and the SEO ranking. So that's why the page load time is very critical, and this is mostly a front end or a client side performance testing part. And next comes the transaction rate. So this transaction rate analyzes the rate at which the transactions are processed, and this helps gauge the system's capacity for sustained performance. That's why the transaction rate is very critical. And next comes the latency. So latency, we all know, this measures the delay between sending a request and receiving a response. So the delay between sending and receiving a response is the latency, and this impacts the real-time applications and user satisfaction. So for example, if you are trying to access an application from India and the server that you are accessing is somewhere in North America, so there will be a lot of latency because there will be a huge delay between you sending the request and that reaches the server, and then the server sends back the response to you. So it travels through a lot of networks, hubs, switches and everything, so there will be a lot of delay. So that is why there will be an impact for the real-time applications and user satisfaction. So that's why latency is very, very critical, because if the latency is too much or if it is very high, then there will be a delay in the response time. So always the latency has to be very less and it has to be under the limit. And that's why people nowadays are using the CDN network, or they're deploying the applications in cloud, so that everybody have their own data centers very closer to them, so there won't be much latency. And next comes the database performance. So assessing the database response times, the connection pooling, and the impact of database queries on overall performance are another critical metrics, and these can be done using AWR report. So there are many other forms of doing this database performance, but again I would say this is another very critical metric that has to be part of your performance test report. And then the last one, which is the server health metrics. So when we monitor the server metrics such as CPU usage, the memory utilization, the disk IO and network traffic, all these resources has to be stable, and this is to test that the CPU or the memory or the disk IO or the network they have to be stable, their infrastructure has to be stable, and we have to ensure that they are stable during the testing duration. So during the testing, so with that I come to an end. So I think we have discussed about what are all the components of your test plan document, and then we have discussed about the performance metrics. So these are some of your critical performance metrics that has to be part of your test plan and that has to be part of your test report. So if you have any doubts or queries, please do comment in the comment section. Also, we will discuss about much more interview questions in our next videos. So until then, it's bye bye from Asan Shanmugam and Little's Law.